On the same sheet of paper that you have done your color chart, we do a couple more exercises just to get you more comfortable with layering of the colored pencil before we do a huge large-scale still life. So the next thing I'm going to have you do is we're going to do a sphere and we're going to do a cube, and just think about how light is hitting forms and how to layer in those categories of light on a curvilinear form and then on a geometric form. So we're going to be doing this with our, we're going to make a blue sphere. So I'm going to have my light blue, my dark blue, which is called a violet blue here. We're going to use orange as part of our complementary pair to create those dark values, and we will end up using our white as well. Okay, so that's going to be kind of our last stage there. I'm going to draw my sphere out in light blue pencil to begin with, and this will be using that light value. I could use our white as well, but using a light value gives me a little bit more flexibility in case I have to erase anything. So here's just the start of my sphere. I'm going to give myself my cast shadow as well to begin with. Our light's going to be coming from this direction here. Now, once I have just my general shape down, I'm going to go ahead and put in a layer of orange where my core shadow is, because this is the complement to blue. When they are physically mixing and optically mixing, like we found in our color chart, they're going to make a really dark value and it's going to be neutral. Now, will I layer that also with a little bit of my violet? Absolutely, because that's just going to help, because its inherent value is darker. Okay, this value here is darker than this one there. So once I have that, I'm going to go ahead and layer in. I'm going to leave the area that I know is going to be my highest highlight. In fact, maybe I'll just take my white and kind of mark out where that big highlight's going to be. I will go over it with blue because I'm doing this as a blue sphere, but that just gives you kind of a denoting factor there. So you can see that I'm thinking about the direction of my mark. I'm not going too much into where I know that highlight and that light is going to be yet. I'm doing the rest of the form. See where these are crossing over each other, that they are starting to get that darker neutral color. And again, this is going to take some layers. So I'm thinking about the direction of my marks. I'm kind of going up and down and swirling because I don't want any one area to dominate yet. And like I said, I'm going all the way up into where that light will be. That blue will end up in there eventually, but I'm going to kind of leave that for right now. Adding just a little bit more pressure. You know, if I went right away, I could get that dark with this, but I want to use these layering techniques to have a richer color, richer values. All right, so see how that orange and blue are working together? My area of reflected light here. Now I'm going to go ahead and take that blue violet and go over where I want that core shadow to be even darker. So I can use that local value, but that orange is kind of neutralizing it. And eventually you won't really see any of that orange because of that layering back and forth. You see that you can't see the marks that I'm making? They're all blending nicely together. That's also what we want. And right here, I'm just kind of going back and forth that core shadow, lifting up into that shadow area a little bit as well. And getting that darker and darker. And I'm going to use this for my cast shadow too. So I'm going to come in, darken that up. I'm going to end up putting some of that orange in there too, just a second. But I really want you to see some of that separation of those two. And come back in with this orange to neutralize that color a little bit more. It's going to start to read as kind of a neutral. And I'll clean that up in a second. Where my orange is kind of left there. And again, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth with those layers. All right, now I'm going to put just a really light layer of white up here where I'm going to have that lightest area and that highlight. And I'm going to bring my light blue into that in just a second. So remember, we want to go really lightly so that way we have flexibility in our marks. I'm going into where we just have that area of light, starting to bring it in here. And with each layer, I'm going to get less and less of the paper texture denoted. The form itself will start to feel more solid. And I'm going to use just a little bit more pressure with each layer as well. Right now I'm using this blue to unify the piece. So I'm going over where I've used the orange, the dark purple, or blue violet. A little bit more pressure. And that's really unifying that monochromatic area. And I'll do the same thing with the white in a second. I'll bring that over more, not going over where I have that highest highlight. And I'll come in and start to define my edge too. I don't want an outline, so as I bring in line, I want to make sure that that comes back into the main space. Bring my white back in, and you start to see how we're getting more solid with the form with each layer. A little bit more pressure, and I don't do that pressure till the end because once you get a certain amount of material on your form, it gets harder to layer on that. And that's when we'd have to bring some sandpaper and such. And try to get those edges. And then here, let's see, we can also use our blending tool. Okay, so you've got your colorless blending tool. I can bring this in, and what this does is basically it's a burnisher. So once you think you have all the value on there that you want, you bring in your blending tool, and it is going to push that material into the tooth of the paper. See this versus here? So that is solidifying that form. And I'm going back and forth and bring it right up to the edge and get that tighter edge of the form. Now, again, once you've burnished this with your blending tool, you have to be careful about how much layer can you go over top of that. Think about the direction of the mark as well. Okay, so I could probably bring some more pigment here because it didn't add any more waxiness, but we're starting to get to the point of there's not a lot more layers that I can do because I've pushed it in and because of that wax. So you can see that difference between where we've burnished and where we haven't. Okay, same thing here with the white. See if we can think about that direction, get this a little bit more continuous here. So I'm really making sure my marks follow that curvature of the form. Okay, burnished, unburnished. You can see the bottom start to get some color on there. Let's see what happens with our cast shadow with that burnishing. Here you can really see how those complement pairs can make that really dark, nice neutral. And if I have that light ground around it, really start to make it stand out against the values that are surrounding your form. So just like we did with our charcoal, I can outline it, but I want to lose that line in the end. Okay. Again, I like that look of the burnishing. It feels like a really solid form, but you just have to watch that layering that occurs. Okay, you can see where that neutral, that building of your complements and the darks and bringing those layers over top can really unify that, and that becomes that core shadow. Okay, so if I was doing this for a cube form, very much the same type of buildup, but we got to think about which where light is hitting on each side. I'm going to do this one in red, make it a little bit smaller. So I'm going to go ahead and draw the face of my cube to begin with, and I'm going to have it go back in space this way. Go back to your 1 point perspective days. This doesn't have to be exact, but we want it believable. Kind of rectilinear type of form. Cubish form. Okay. That's all right. Okay, so our light again is coming in from this side, and we're going to have it hitting mostly that top plane. So we're going to have this side here is going to be kind of our mid value. This is where that idea that the light would be reflecting back up onto it. It's not our deepest shadow. That's going to be this side here, along with our cast shadow. So I'm changing the direction of material till I get a nice solid, no big marks. See, I'm still really loosely putting material down. Here I'm going to use our green grass, which is our complement, and using that on this darkest shadow side. I'm going to also use that in our cast shadow as well. So right now this looks kind of strange to have those on there, but what you'll see is as we start laying this out and I put that red over top of that green, you'll see that local color of our red cube comes into play, and they start to neutralize. We get that neutral kind of gray black, and it starts to feel like that shadow side. So this one here, I'm going to go ahead and put one more layer on before I do the top, so that way I can really differentiate between the two. And remember, I don't want to press too hard yet. We'll save that for the end, and we can use our blending tool again to see what that will look like. Okay, so now I'll be able to do my top. My pencil's starting to get dull, so we'll see how far we get. But I can do my top in this kind of light layer, and that'll help me see the difference between top, side, and side. I'm going to put just a little bit, no, we're going to just go away. A little bit of the white on the top here. And this is why I talk about, so just so you guys can see just how pink this becomes. So our red box, suddenly where the light is hitting it, is reading pink versus just that bright red. But we can start to get a sense of those sides. Now for the cast shadow, I'm going to show you something a little bit different. We're going to be taking our dark brown, and we're going to use that with our blue purple as our shadow. So I'm going to use this number 1, kind of tighten up that edge. Then I'm going to go ahead and bring the shadow out something like this. We'll say it's kind of a long cast shadow. And brown with a dark blue, like an ultramarine or our blue violet that we have in our package, those two will mix and make a nice neutral black as well without using black. So it becomes a chromatic. We're using color, we're using chroma to make that dark shadow. So brown itself, and you see how this is very close to what that is already pretty dark. And then if we layer that blue on top, they start to make a really nice dark color. And we're going to put a little bit more pigment on both of these, all of these areas, so that we can really see, once we take that blending tool, how they look in that physical form. So let's see if my red will work with this. So I'm going to do one more layer of red over top of our light. This will bring that color back, this will bring that chroma back, but keeping that light value. Go over our dark side here, using a little bit more pressure, getting a little bit more pigment down. And we'll do that on our darkest side as well. And then one more layer over here. And then I'm going to bring that blending tool so we can start to solidify like we had over there. Remember, wherever an object is sitting on the table is going to be one of your darkest points. And with cast shadows, we've got light that hits objects and kind of comes around corners too. So you really have to think about that as you are building forms. Now, the tip of my blending tool has got some pigment on it from over here. So off to the side, I'm just going to rub that and try to clean it off a little bit. Starting from my lightest area to my darkest area. This will allow me to not contaminate a light value with a dark value. So there's that side. Remember, the blending tool works as that burnisher, so you can see how we're pushing the material into that texture, that tooth of the paper. And again, I'm going from lightest to darkest. But this should allow you to really see the difference between one side to the other of our cube. And here where we've got that darkest one, what would be considered like that core shadow on our sphere. This is the core shadow of our cube. And where I can see that my green and my red have not overlapped nicely, I can bring in my material and even that back out just a little bit on those forms so we don't see that line quite so much. And that's also what the blending tool can help you see that too. All right, there's that. And clean off some of that red on a scrap sheet and come in and get this cast shadow. And we see that the cast shadow is cooler, those blues, than the red, and that's something to also think about, is that shadows are usually cooler in nature. Areas where the light is going to be warmer. And that helps us see that space. Things recede and come forward. Okay, so that was to give us a white horizon line here. You can really see how this form will stand out against that. And suddenly we have a very dimensional sphere in space. There we go. Really dark shadow. If I wanted to lighten that up, I could take my kneaded eraser. If we want a little bit of difference between these two, there'd be some reflected light there. But this gives you that sense of where that light's hitting in those sides of those forms. We're going to practice this, both your sphere, your cube, and really getting down that application, how hard to press, how light.